Hello, I'm Jamie Yuenger, and this is If You Knew Me, a podcast about the inner lives of women. Most weeks on this show, we walk into the heart and mind of one woman. Some weeks, we offer interview-based episodes with experts on themes relevant to women's lives. Our storytelling guests can choose to share their real names or to stay anonymous. This week, we hear from Tamitha Broadway. That's her real name. And as an intro to Tamitha, I want to tell you a personal story. This past week, I've been preparing to visit America, the United States. I haven't been back to the US in almost 4 years. It's my home country, however troubled, however grand. It is where I am from. And leading up to the trip, I've been feeling quite emotional. Anyway, the other night, my husband Piet and I went on a walk after dinner, and we had the baby phone app working over Wi-Fi. So we walked about 5 minutes from our house and we sat down on this bench. And while we were sitting on the bench chatting, we noticed all these people walking into a nearby cafe. Eventually, we learned that there was a small concert happening with a singer-songwriter from the US. And to my utter surprise, she was from Alabama, which is the state where I went to high school. After seeing a few dozen people enter the cafe, my husband and I thought, let's just do this. We hardly get to do spontaneous things as a couple with a toddler, so we're just gonna throw caution to the wind and go see this concert. Our baby is sleeping. We had her on the baby phone. So we enter, and at some point before the concert starts, I see this striking looking woman, and I have a hunch that it's the singer. So I approach her and introduce myself. And it's the singer. Her name is Hannah Aldridge. And Hannah and I chat, and I learned that she grew up just about 1 hour away from where I went to high school. That was so crazy for me, since I never meet other Americans in this very non-touristy part of the Netherlands where I live. And so we smile and we laugh about this coincidence. And then Piet and I sit down for her concert. And she, Hannah Aldridge, sings about America, its darkness and its lightness. And guys, I was weeping the entire time because I miss my country. I'm so glad that I live here in the Netherlands, and I still miss my country. And then I thought, how crazy is it that this week's podcast story, this week's episode, is with a woman from Alabama? Tamitha Broadway is the sister of one of my friends from high school. Tamitha, who you are about to meet, she was about 2 or 3 years younger than me when we were in high school. So when we were teenagers, I really had no idea what was going on in her life. She was in my peripheral vision, so to speak. I knew that she existed, but just barely. And because of this show, I have now heard and documented her incredible story. I cannot begin to tell you what her story is about because I don't want to give it away, but it is big. It is about crawling back to yourself with dirt under your fingernails. And I think Tamitha's story proves just how much is going on in the lives of all of us. The people we know so well and the people who are in our peripheral vision. Tamitha's story is entitled, It's Mother Effing Game Time.
Well, there's a lot that's happened in my life. And, starting from my childhood, I don't need to start that far back, but all I really need to tell you about that is that as a child, and I'm so lucky in this sense, I never went through anything traumatic. I grew up in a house where I was told that I was loved every day. I was told that my parents were proud of me every day, no matter what I did. Things didn't really start going downhill until about middle school. I have dealt with depression since as far back as I can remember, off and on. And I think a lot of it was about identity, like it is so many times with younger people. These kids are just trying to find their way in the world, and I was one of them. And like I said, I had a really great upbringing, really close to my family. I started drinking in high school, kind of normal binge drinking type of thing. But I was taking it a little bit further and experimenting with caffeine pills and things like that, things that other people were not doing. My drinking escalated in college, and I think that's really when I started having a lot of issues with depression when it came to not knowing what I wanted to do with my life. That was always a huge issue for me in my heart. Not knowing what my purpose was. I just wanted a purpose, and I felt like everybody around me was finding theirs, or they already had theirs. My sister knew she wanted to be an engineer since she was in almost elementary school. I just remember being so jealous of people who knew what they wanted to do, and it caused me deep depression. It really did. I spent the next few years just trying different things and really trying to find myself. And during those years, my drinking got worse. I started at 21, I started working in bars. I kind of moved all over the place. And being the girl that could drink everybody under the table kind of became my identity. As sad as that is, I think back to that and I go, what a sad, sad life. But I thought that I was something special. I did work, I won't say the name of it, but I worked at a particular bar where we were treated like celebrities. And in my 21-year-old mind, that was the coolest you could get. So that's when my drinking really escalated, and I did start taking Adderall, and I started taking it all the time. And I was in EMT school, and it's like I only had time to work, study, and sleep, and I only had time for 2 of those things. So sleep went out the window, and I just started popping Adderall like candy, staying up all night to work and study. And my drinking escalated to the point where I lost my job. I had been the head girl at my job for 5 years, and they had to fire me. I became a liability. At that point, I started doing other pills. I started doing a lot of cocaine. I started working in a bar where cocaine was the norm. But the thing was, when everybody else was doing bumps of cocaine, I was doing lines. And it just seemed like I had to do everything to the extreme, everything. At a certain point, my mom came up to visit. My hair was falling out. I couldn't eat. My face was sunken in. I was a disaster. And I remember her just crying when she left, and she hugged me and didn't want to let me go. And I think she thought I was going to die. She really did. And so not too long after that, I left. I was living in Nashville. I left Nashville and I moved back home and back in with my parents. And that's when I started stealing pills from them. And I thought I was okay, but, I tried to tell them that I had a problem, and I think they just didn't get it. And I got a little bit better at that point. So my parents got me my own apartment because I started paramedic school. And I decided I loved the medical field, and I decided that's what I wanted to do. So I started paramedic school, and that's when I met my husband. At that point, he and I were both in outpatient drug treatment programs, but we didn't know it. We didn't tell each other for a while. We fell in love right away, and once I started seeing his drug use come back into play, I just went along with him. And that's when my addiction really spiraled out of control. That's when I started doing crystal meth. That's when I started doing opiates. It got really, really out of hand. And I actually got kicked out of paramedic school. I actually was going to clinicals, working on the ambulance, treating patients high, and sometimes drunk. I had a preceptor that knew I was on drugs, and so he talked to my professors, and I got kicked out of school. I was almost done. And they actually did allow me to come back pending a couple of drug tests, and I did. And they let me come back, and I finished. I got a job on an ambulance as a full-time paramedic for about 5 or 6 months, and then I had my license taken away because of drugs. I was showing up to work high, and everybody knew it. I actually crashed my car on the way to work one morning and had to take a drug test and failed, and I lost my license. And that is something that I had worked so hard for. And when that happened, I remember going home from having been fired and having my license taken away, and I got high. And I sat on the porch with a cigarette, and I started bawling my eyes out, and I said, this is it. I'm done. I give up. I completely give up. That's it. I just can't do this anymore. I gave up on ever having a normal life. I gave up on trying to be a sober person. I gave up on even pretending that I could get it together. My husband and I had gotten married at this point. He had a daughter that I started raising because he actually, and my husband would get better and then get bad again and then get better. It's typical addiction. You get it together for a minute and then you relapse. And he did that the whole time we were together. He did that over and over again. And he had a daughter that he actually was able to get custody of. And the only reason that he was able to get custody of her is because her mom just happened to be worse off than we were. My husband was the kind of addict that was able to go to work and make a living and, keep it together to an extent. And he and I at first were really good about not getting too crazy when she was with us. She was still in a semi-safe environment at that point when she was with us. And her mom was on supervised visitation with her. And so when she would go there, we would get really, really bad, and then try to get it together by the time she came back. So I basically became a full-time mom as well at that time. So I was working on the ambulance, before I got fired. I was working on the ambulance 24-hour shifts, rushing home to take care of a 2-year-old all day. And it was really, really hard. And I had no experience with children at all. So I had to learn really, really quick. So he and I had gotten married. And one weekend when my daughter was gone, we had been up, I would say I had been up for about a week using drugs, no sleep, hallucinating, everything. And because, if you don't sleep for a week and you're not eating, you start hallucinating. It was really bad. And so I had gone to a funeral for my friend's grandfather and I came home and my husband had been high and he had gotten some liquid GHB from somebody and he drank some of it. And I looked over and he was unconscious and he was turning blue. So I called an ambulance and he ended up in the ICU for 3 or 4 days. He had overdosed. And at that point, the doctors wouldn't even allow me to go back and see him because I was so messed up. And I remember my dad came to the hospital and he took me out to the parking garage and he said, all right, you're going to treatment. Do you need 30 days? Do you need 60 days? Do you need a year? What do you need? We're done. So he and my mom found me a treatment program. And I remember they took me to lunch the day before I left. My parents were having to pay for it out of pocket. I didn't have insurance. And my dad said to me, he said, Tamitha, we're doing this one time. So you better get it right. And I said, okay. And that's exactly what I did. I went to treatment. I went to California. And when I got to the airport there, I got off the plane. I went to the bar. I got a triple shot of vodka. I downed it. And I said, that's it. And I went down the escalator to my ride and I went to treatment. And the rest is history as far as my rehab goes. I was ready to stop. I just needed medical intervention. So I was at treatment for 30 days and I've never used again. I've never touched a drink. I've never touched a drug. I've never used since that day, and that was 2014. Treatment is the thing in my life that changed my perspective on everything. Once I had a clear head, I was able to take in information from people who had overcome it. I'll never forget I had a counselor, and I was talking with the counselor one day, and I was doing that addict thing where I was playing the victim, and I was saying, I have to now go home and be the backbone of this family because my husband was an addict, my daughter's mom and her stepdad were addicts, and I was the only one that was sober. And I felt like that was such a weight to carry. And I said, this is so unfair that I'm the one that has to go home and do this. And my counselor explained to me that I have to shift my perspective. He told me, instead of looking at it like this is something you have to do, he said, what you have to understand is that you were chosen to do this. God chose you. You're the chosen one. You have to look at it as a privilege and an honor instead of an obligation or something you have to do. And just in that moment, it clicked. And I just thought, he's right. And it made me feel special and it made me feel like I had a mission. And again, here we go, a purpose. It just really shifted my perspective on things instead of living in a victim mentality all the time, which is so typical of an addict. And so once I shifted my perspective, I felt like I could do it. And, I did have a lot of people in treatment tell me that going home and being with my husband, who was probably going to relapse, I was told that I probably wasn't going to be able to stay sober. And I kind of said, well, watch me, because I knew I was done. And so once I got home, my house was clean and everything seemed fine. And about 3 days after I was home, my husband came home high. And I think in that moment, I knew that I was kind of on my own. My husband and I had a very happy marriage. We had no marital problems. We loved each other very, very much. Addiction is a disease, and people always picture somebody living in a cardboard box who has a heroin addiction or whatnot, but it wasn't like that. We kept it together, and we were very, very much in love. I loved my husband very much. And so in 2017, he had done good for a while, and then he got really bad again. And there was one day, it was a Saturday, he had 2 seizures. And my husband was a type 1 diabetic as well. And so whenever he would relapse, his diabetes would just go haywire. And that was the scariest part for me, because there were times I came home from work and he was seizing in the bedroom with my child sleeping in the other bedroom. And it was really scary. So one day he had 2 seizures and I could not convince him to go to the hospital. He would not go. And so the next Tuesday, he had gotten up and gone to work. And I got up that morning, got my daughter up, and then I went in the kitchen and things were just left unkept. The cabinets were open. The George Foreman grill was left on. He didn't lock the door behind him. There were just a lot of things that were off, and something felt off. And so as I was getting ready for work, I tried to call him and he didn't answer, just to see if he was okay with his blood sugar and everything. And I got a call from the hospital that he had had an episode and I needed to come to the hospital. And so I packed my daughter up and I called my work and told him I wasn't coming, and I went to the hospital. And at that time, the rest of the family was getting there. If you see somebody walk out of that back room in regular clothes as opposed to scrubs, something's bad, because it's a representative. She said, he is critical. And I knew in that moment that it was an overdose, that it wasn't his diabetes. And they took us into that dreaded back room, the room you never want to go into. And they told me that my husband had overdosed at work and was dead. That day, my entire life changed. You think at that moment that it can't get any worse. So I just kind of went into survival mode when that happened. I knew, because we had actually refiled, because my daughter's mom had been put on unsupervised visitation, and then she had had 2 people die in her home of overdoses in the last couple weeks before my husband had relapsed. So he had actually filed papers to have her put back on supervised visitation. So we were waiting on court. So that day, my husband died at like 9 a.m. I filed paperwork at noon to get full custody of my stepdaughter. So I went back to work after 6 days. I went into robot mode. I knew I was going to have to pay for a lawyer to get custody of her. I went from a 2-income household to a 1-income household overnight. So I just sucked it up and I went back to work after 6 days, and it was extremely difficult, especially when you work in customer service. And so 10 days after my husband died, I'm at work and I get a text message that my daughter's mom had overdosed and was on life support. And when I was told that she was without oxygen to her brain for 15 minutes, I knew she wasn't going to make it. And it was like an out-of-body experience. I just thought, I have to get to my daughter. I just have to get to my daughter. And we didn't actually tell her for a few days, because her mom actually was taken off life support on July 4th. So my husband and her mom died exactly 2 weeks apart, both from overdoses. And we didn't want her to forever associate the 4th of July with her mom dying. So we waited until the next day, and I told her, I truly felt in that moment that I ruined her life, by what I told her. It was just really difficult. My daughter's mom's mom, so her maternal grandmother, had filed for custody as well, because they just wanted to make sure that they got time with her as well. We spent the next 6 months going through mediation, and it was almost like holding my breath for 6 months straight. We finally worked something out, and I was awarded full custody of my stepdaughter, and her mom's family has visitation. And we've just kind of gone on from there. This is 5 years now, and we all spent a lot of time and effort building relationships with each other. And when I say we, I mean myself, my husband's family, her mom's family, my parents. It's such a beautiful thing because we have all come together as a team to take care of this little girl. And we all get along great. And, I'm so thankful. I thank God every day for the relationship that I have with her maternal grandmother because we are so close now. And we co-parent her perfectly. And we have never disagreed about anything. Everybody has worked together and this child is thriving. She's in all honors classes and she makes straight A's without even trying. She's on cheerleading squad. She's in the honor society. She's perfectly behaved. I mean, she's amazing. We've had our hurdles when it comes to, parenting a child that's been through that kind of trauma. But on this day, I can tell you as I sit here, everything is okay. And so I say all that to say, in conclusion, the moment that I was told that my daughter's mom had overdosed and I knew she was going to die, everything in my life up till that point flashed before my eyes. Every single thing I had been through was so clear to me that this right here in this moment is my purpose. God put me through all of that to get to this moment, and it's Mother Effing Game Time. It is my job to get my daughter and my family through this, and I'm up for it. I had gotten so strong through all of those experiences that I thought, I got this. It's not going to be easy, but I got it. Because I always thought your purpose meant your job. In my head, it was just your career and your job. And I realized in that moment that that's complete BS. It's not necessarily that. My purpose in this life was to get my daughter and my family through this. And that's exactly what I did. We just put one foot in front of the other. And like I said a minute ago, everything's okay. And that's kind of where we are today. I've been able to be excited about my future. And I have never once, from the moment my husband died or my addiction or whatever, felt like this was done to me. I felt like all of this was done for me and for my child. And that's kind of where I sit today.
Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode. Tamitha Broadway is a mother. She is also an accomplished bodybuilder. She's been clean for over 8 years. Before I sign off today, I'm going to invite you to join us on Sunday, September 25th, for this podcast's first ever live online event. As I've told you before, the theme is major life changes, and our guest is Sister Monica Claire. Sister Monica will talk about her life journey of leaving Hollywood and becoming a progressive nun. That's probably not the major life change that you're going to make, but so much of what Sister Monica has experienced is relevant to anyone wanting and willing to step into a better life. Sister Monica is super warm, and she's very excited to spend time with us. So I hope you join us. Tickets are $9. The link to buy them is in the show notes. If you're a patron/monthly supporter of this podcast, you will get a free ticket via your Patreon information. And if you subscribe to our newsletter before September 23rd, you'll get 25% off. I would really love to see you and spend time with you on September 25th. I hope you can join us. This podcast is produced by me, Jamie Yuenger, and my husband, Piet Hurkmans. Thanks so much for listening to If You Knew Me. We'll be back with you next week.